You're all sitting here today in the middle of preparing for your final exams. Maybe you're thinking about that homework assignment that's due later today, or all the other things that are on your plate. Well, I'm here to take you back to a time when I was sitting exactly in the same seats that you are. Nearly 8 years ago, I arrived at the south gate of TEDxBJ80 High School for the first time. I traveled with 15 other American students, and we had just flown from Washington, D.C. to Beijing. We arrived jet-lagged, but excited. We were about to embark on a 9-month gap year, full of language learning and cultural exchange. This wasn't my first time coming to China, and it wasn't my first time studying Chinese either. But it was my first time attending a local Chinese high school. The first time I'd studied Chinese in a Chinese classroom alongside Chinese peers. And we were so excited to start this journey. But the thing is, we weren't quite sure what the learning would look like. In my first week at TEDxBJ80, my earliest memories were of some of the silly mistakes I made because of my limited language ability. Things like taking the bus for the first time to go back to my host family's house, and only realizing 30 minutes in that I was going the complete wrong direction. Or when I went to Carrefour with my classmates to buy school supplies, and I realized when I asked for pencils in the complete wrong tones, I realized that asking in the wrong tone didn't just mean I was saying the word wrong. It meant I was asking for something completely different. Or also the memories of the first Chinese friends I made. Like Coco and Andy, the 2 girls who helped us bring our huge suitcases up the 6 flights of stairs up to our dorms. I remember the awkward pauses in between our conversations as my friends and I frantically tried to look up the words we didn't know on our Pleco dictionary apps. These interactions and silly mistakes were the beginning of a bigger lesson I learned and only really came to realize until the end of my time here. And that was that learning didn't always happen where I expected it. But you might be wondering, how did I end up at the south gate of TEDxBJ80? Well, that story starts much earlier and about 4 hours south of Beijing on the high-speed train. It starts in Hefei, in Anhui province, the city I was born. At 2 years old, I was adopted by an American family, and I moved to the United States. Now, growing up as an adopted Chinese American, I always knew China was a part of my story. But my understanding was mostly through books or through the stories my parents had told me of their trip coming to China to get me. And at the time, all I knew was my life growing up as a normal American kid in Arlington, Virginia. My parents didn't speak Chinese, they don't look Chinese, and they had never lived in China either. And so, my parents, though, they did put a lot of effort into keeping me connected to my Chinese heritage. Every Chinese New Year, my mom would take me to a dinner celebration with other adopted kids. Or for my Gotcha Day, the anniversary of my adoption, my mom would always buy me a book about China. And so, maybe the most important thing that they did for me was they always encouraged me to ask questions. Ask questions about China, ask questions about my past. And even when they didn't know the answer, they'd always do their best to find one. And as I got older, and I became to come to terms with my own identity, more questions started to arise. What was China actually like? Why was I adopted? Are the students in China similar to the students back home in the US? Well, at 13, I finally had the opportunity to start answering some of those questions. My family took me back to China for the first time, where I came here to Beijing, but I also went back to Hefei, my hometown. I thought this trip was going to answer a lot of my questions, but instead, it led to many more. But I realized that this is exactly what I need, because this curiosity I had about China finally turned into something more than just an interest. It turned into action. When I came back, I enrolled in Chinese classes at school. I was determined to be able to come back and be able to speak to people here in the local language. And on the surface, I was just learning another language. I was fulfilling an elective requirement. But deeper down, I was exploring this curiosity I had about the people, the culture, and this place that has always been a part of my story. And that's what led me to apply for the NISLI Language Scholarship. This was a language scholarship that took students in the US all over the world to learn languages. And that is what brought me here to the south gate of Beijing 80 for the first time. Now, Beijing 80 was the perfect testing ground for this curiosity, but it didn't manifest in the classroom or through the grades that I got or the tests that I took. It manifested in the daily interactions I had with kids. Now, I learned that learning was not just confined to the classroom. Learning happened in between classes, with the conversations I had with the Chinese students and also the international students I was studying with. It happened every Friday night when I went home to my host family, and over cut up fruit, my host mom and I would talk about how our weeks had gone. Or it happened here in the cafeteria, when my friends and I tried to explain to the cafeteria workers that my friend had a tree nut allergy, and what would happen if he ate tree nuts. Or it happened outside in the streets in Beijing, when I went around with my American friends and had to explain to Chinese people that yes, despite my Asian face, I too was American. And all of these interactions were part of a greater learning process. And in that learning process, I came to realize I was building skills. But the skill was not about language learning. The skill was about learning itself. The skill was making mistakes, being confused, not really understanding what was going on 80% of the time. But it was also about asking questions, receiving feedback from my teachers, and continuing on and keep trying, even if I was making mistakes. And like any skill, the more you practice, the better you become. And of course, there were ups and downs throughout the 9 months here. There are days where I was making a lot of progress in the classroom, but then the second I left, I still couldn't understand my host grandpa's strong Beijing accent. Or when I was on the plane or the train, I still had no idea what they were telling us on the loudspeaker. There are also times when we'd go out for lunch, and rather than pulling out our dictionaries and trying to look up every character on the menu, we just point at a picture of something that looked tasty and say, 我要这个. And the thing is, over time, these things did get easier. I began to understand more, I could recognize more characters, and I generally felt less lost living in Beijing. But the important thing is that I never got a grade for figuring these things out. Instead, I learned how to adapt, I learned how to recover from my mistakes, I learned how to keep moving forward. And those things, I realized, are just as valuable as anything I learned in a textbook. Now, that's not to say that grades don't matter or that the learning in the classroom doesn't count, because those are also very important. And I wouldn't be here today living comfortably in Beijing without the support and knowledge of all the great teachers I met here at Beijing 80. But it is a reminder that grades are just a measurement, and they don't always fully capture the learning itself or the learning process that you have to go through. And so a lot of the valuable things that I learned here at Beijing 80 didn't show up on my transcript and didn't show up on my HSK score. And throughout this journey here at Beijing 80, I realized that this experience started the same way many of the other experiences I've had throughout life. It started not with an answer, but with a question. And that question doesn't always have a correct answer. At school, we're taught and we're rewarded for having the correct answers, but curiosity works a little bit differently. Curiosity requires us to be willing to admit that we don't always have the correct answer, and sometimes there is no right and there is no wrong. And in this exploration of my curiosity here in China and other experiences as well, I began to notice a pattern, and that pattern starts with curiosity. Curiosity leads to learning. Learning leads to building confidence. Building confidence enables us to look for opportunities, and those opportunities enable us to ask even more questions, bringing us back to the beginning of curiosity. So for my life, I was curious about China growing up as a kid. That led me to ask my parents, what would it be like to be in China? Coming to China led me to learn Chinese. Learning Chinese gave me the confidence to apply for NISLI, which gave me the opportunity to come here to Beijing 80. And coming to Beijing 80 and meeting people from all over the world gave me the curiosity and also the confidence to do my undergraduate degree in Abu Dhabi, where I studied for 4 years. And the exposure to new cultures and all these different people from different parts of the world led me to have the confidence again and the curiosity to come back to Beijing and do my master's here at Peking University. And the questions I continue to ask and the curiosity I continue to explore brings me to today, where I work here in Beijing at a multilateral development bank, where I get to explore the questions of how does sustainable infrastructure help solve some of the bigger global development problems the world faces today. And now, back when I was young and I was asking my parents about China, I never thought that this would change the direction of my life, but it did. It brought me back to the country I was born. It brought me here to BJ80. It led me to live abroad, led me to learn a new language, and to meet people from all over. And this wasn't because I had some master plan or because I knew the right answers. It was because I kept following the questions that mattered the most to me. Now, many of you here are sitting here probably thinking about exams or your summer break, or maybe you're thinking about your university applications that you're going to have to start working on this summer. And those things are important. But alongside your academic goals, I hope you leave space for personal curiosity. Because the questions you're asking today, no matter how big or how small, can and will change the direction of your future. So, 8 years ago, I came to Beijing 80 looking for answers. And today, I stand here realizing that it's not so much about looking for the right answers, but it's more about asking the right questions and asking more questions. So, when you leave this room today, I want you to focus more on your own questions. What are you curious about? What makes you excited to come to school? Is there anything that you're scared to ask or you've been avoiding because you've been focusing too much on studying or your grades? Because you never know which question is going to change the direction of your life. Thank you.